Millionaire shocked to see his ex as his fiancée's doctor, then spots a girl who looks just like him. Rex Larson sat in the back seat of his car as it slowed to a stop in front of the hospital. The building rose quietly against the morning sky, all glass and clean lines, the kind of place designed to look calm no matter what stories were unfolding inside. He checked his phone out of habit. 3 missed calls, 12 unread emails, a calendar packed with meetings he would skip for the next 2 hours. For a man who owned half the city on paper, it felt strange how little control he had over his own thoughts. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't worried. He just felt hollow, like something important had slipped through his hands years ago, and this place somehow knew it. As the driver opened the door, Rex paused, and in that moment, a thought crossed his mind that made no sense at all. The moment I heard her voice, I knew my past had caught up with me. Rex stepped into the lobby, and everything felt familiar in the way luxury always did. Soft music played from hidden speakers, the air smelled clean, people moved calmly, dressed in suits and quiet confidence. It was the same atmosphere he lived in every day, polished, controlled, efficient. This was his world, a world of boardrooms and contracts, of late dinners and early flights, of achievements that looked impressive on paper and felt strangely weightless in real life. From the outside, Rex Larson had everything: a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, a tech company valued higher than his childhood neighborhood combined, a reputation as a man who never failed. And yet, standing there in the hospital lobby, he felt like a guest in his own life. Not unhappy, just disconnected, as if he had spent years building something flawless, only to realize it didn't quite belong to him anymore. He looked around at the families in the waiting area, a father tying his son's shoelaces, an elderly couple holding hands without speaking, a woman nervously pacing with a phone pressed to her ear. None of them noticed him. And for the first time in a long while, Rex felt invisible. Daisy's hand slipped into his, warm and familiar. "Come on," she said gently. "We don't want to be late." Rex nodded and followed her toward the reception desk, his thoughts still drifting somewhere he couldn't explain. Daisy Walker had a way of making everything feel easy. She was kind without trying, organized without controlling, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, planned holidays, and believed in building a future step by step. She was also the woman he was supposed to marry in 3 months. Their engagement had made headlines in a few business blogs, photos of them smiling at charity events, comments about how perfect they looked together. And they did look perfect, just not deep. Daisy gave her name to the receptionist, then turned back to Rex with a reassuring smile. "You're really overthinking this," she said. "It's just a routine checkup." "I know," Rex replied, forcing a small smile. "I just don't like hospitals." He didn't say that hospitals reminded him of things he couldn't schedule, of moments he couldn't control, of choices that couldn't be undone. They took their seats in the waiting area. Rex reached for his phone again, scrolling without reading, until a voice cut through the soft background noise. "Daisy Walker?" The sound of it made his chest tighten. Not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, but because he knew it, and he knew he shouldn't. Rex lifted his head slowly, and for a moment, the room lost its shape. Standing a few steps away was a woman in a white coat, holding a clipboard close to her chest. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, her posture more composed, her expression professional, but her eyes were exactly the same. Lori Boyer, the woman who once knew every version of him, the woman who shared late-night conversations about dreams that felt endless at the time, the woman who disappeared from his life without ever explaining why. His past, now standing in front of his future. Their eyes met. The world around them kept moving, but Rex felt completely still, as if time had decided to focus only on the two of them. Lori blinked first. She inhaled, straightened her shoulders, and let a calm smile settle on her face. "Follow me, please." Her voice was steady, too steady. Daisy stood up, grateful and unaware. "Thank you, doctor." Rex didn't move. His body refused. Lori turned and walked toward the hallway without looking back. But Rex noticed something no one else did. Her hand was shaking. Rex stood there a second too long. Daisy had already taken a few steps forward before realizing he wasn't beside her. "Rex," she asked softly. He forced his legs to move. Each step felt heavier than it should have, like he was walking into a memory instead of a hallway. The corridor was quiet. White walls, soft footsteps, the kind of silence that made every thought louder. Lori walked ahead of them, her back straight, her pace professional. Not once did she turn around. Not once did she acknowledge what stood between them. Daisy chatted lightly, unaware of the tension tightening in the air. "So, do you work here full-time?" she asked Lori. "Yes," Lori replied. "I've been here for several years." Her voice was calm, too calm for someone who had just come face to face with a life she left behind. Rex tried to focus on the present, on Daisy's hand in his, on the steady rhythm of their footsteps, but his mind kept drifting backward, to small apartments and late dinners, to promises spoken quietly, to a version of himself that believed love was enough. The hallway suddenly felt narrower, not physically, emotionally, like the world had shrunk to 3 people walking toward a door that shouldn't exist. And Rex realized something that unsettled him deeply. He hadn't thought about Lori in years, but seeing her now, it felt like no time had passed at all. They entered the examination room, and the door closed softly behind them. Daisy sat on the edge of the bed, swinging her feet slightly as she talked about wedding venues and color themes, her voice light and hopeful. Rex stood near the wall, his attention fixed on nothing in particular. Lori moved around the room with practiced ease, checking files, adjusting equipment, asking routine questions. She smiled at Daisy when appropriate, nodded at the right moments, played her role perfectly. But Rex watched her reflection in the glass cabinet. Her movements were controlled, her expression calm, her voice steady, too steady, as if she were holding something in place with sheer will. When she handed Rex a form to sign, their fingers brushed for less than a second. It was nothing, and it was everything. Lori pulled her hand back immediately. "I'll step out while you change," she said. Her voice shifted slightly at the end, not enough for Daisy to notice, but enough for Rex to feel it. As she left the room, Rex realized something that unsettled him more than seeing her at all. He wasn't wondering why she was here. He was wondering what she had never told him. Rex waited in the hallway while Daisy went for her tests. The hospital felt quieter than before, as if the building itself had decided to lower its voice. He sat on a bench near the wall, hands resting on his knees, trying to slow his thoughts. Then he noticed her. A little girl sat a few seats away, swinging her legs back and forth. She held a small backpack on her lap and stared at him with open curiosity, a calm, observant expression that felt strangely familiar. Rex looked away at first, then looked back, and his stomach tightened. It wasn't just that she was looking at him, it was how she was looking at him, like she recognized something. The girl tilted her head slightly and asked, in a soft but clear voice, "Why do you look like my daddy?" Rex felt the air leave his lungs, not dramatically, not loudly, just suddenly. Before he could speak, the girl stood up and ran toward one of the nearby offices. Rex stood without thinking, his legs moved before his mind caught up. And deep down, a quiet thought formed that terrified him. That question shouldn't exist. Rex reached the doorway just as Lori looked up. Her eyes moved from her daughter to him, and all the control she had been holding on to disappeared. The color drained from her face. For a brief second, none of them spoke, not Rex, not Lori, not the little girl standing between them. The room felt smaller than it was. Rex's voice came out quietly, almost careful. "She's mine?" Lori closed her eyes. Not in shock, not in denial, in acceptance. "Yes." The word landed softly, but its weight pressed into Rex's chest.
6 years of school mornings he never saw. 6 years of birthdays he never knew about.
6 years of a child growing up without ever knowing his name. His life, the one he had built so carefully, suddenly felt thin, fragile, incomplete. And in that exact moment, standing in a hospital hallway he never wanted to enter, Rex understood something with absolute clarity. Everything he believed about his life was wrong. This wasn't just a routine visit. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was the day his future met the part of his past he never knew existed, and nothing after this would ever feel the same again. If you enjoy emotional stories about real life, subscribe to Mr. Cooper Stories. Rex's penthouse sat high above the city, wrapped in glass and quiet. From his bedroom window, he could see everything. Traffic flowing like veins of light, towers standing tall, people moving with purpose far below. It was the kind of view most people dreamed about. Rex stood barefoot on the cold floor, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his assistant reminding him of a meeting with investors. Another message from a journalist requesting an interview. Another from Daisy sending him a photo of wedding invitations she was reviewing. He responded to the first two immediately. He left Daisy's message unopened for a few minutes longer than he should have, but because something about the future felt strangely heavy lately. And standing there, in a home that looked perfect in every magazine feature, Rex couldn't shake the feeling that his life was impressive, but not intimate. Rex's days followed a rhythm he rarely questioned. Wake up before sunrise, scan emails before speaking to anyone, meetings stacked back to back, dinners that felt more like negotiations than meals. Every hour had a purpose. Every decision had a return. He built his company the same way he built his reputation, carefully, patiently, always one step ahead of everyone else. People called him disciplined, focused, relentless. What they didn't see were the small things he had quietly traded away. Missed birthdays, conversations cut short, Friends who slowly stopped calling, not because he pushed them away, but because he was always on his way somewhere else. Even now, sitting in the hospital earlier that morning, part of his mind was still thinking about deals, deadlines, and growth charts. Success had taught him how to manage everything, except himself, and for the first time, that felt less like a strength and more like a warning. Daisy fit into Rex's life the way everything else did, neatly. They met at a charity event 2 years earlier. She worked in event planning, had a calm laugh, and never tried to compete with his schedule. She admired his ambition without questioning it, supported his goals without asking him to slow down. With Daisy, life was easy. No arguments about time, no emotional surprises, no complicated history. They traveled when his calendar allowed, ate at the same restaurants, spoke about the future in practical terms, houses, holidays, children someday. She loved him in a quiet, stable way, and Rex cared for her deeply, just not urgently. Their relationship felt like a well-organized plan, logical, comfortable, predictable, the kind of partnership that looked perfect to everyone watching. And maybe that was the problem, because lately Rex had begun to wonder whether love was supposed to feel this efficient. The engagement had been Rex's idea, not in a dramatic way, no grand surprise, no emotional confession, just a conversation over dinner after a long week. "We should probably make this official," he had said casually. Daisy smiled, surprised but happy. "I was hoping you'd say that." They chose a ring together, took photos, announced it quietly to friends and family. The news spread faster than Rex expected. Colleagues congratulated him. His mother cried over the phone. Even people he barely knew sent messages about how perfect they looked together. And they did. Two successful adults building a future. But as the plans grew more detailed, venues, guest lists, seating charts, Rex felt a strange distance forming between himself and the life everyone was celebrating. Not because he doubted Daisy, but because he couldn't remember the last time he felt excited. He wasn't unhappy. He was calm. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought surfaced that made him uncomfortable. Shouldn't this feel like more? There were moments when Rex noticed the silence, not the comfortable kind, the kind that sat gently between two people who had nothing urgent to say. They would sit across from each other at dinner, the city glowing outside the windows, plates half finished, phones resting beside their hands. Daisy would talk about her day, about work, friends, small frustrations that never lasted long. He nodded, asked questions, smiled at the right moments, but his mind often drifted somewhere else, not to another person, not to another life, just to a feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't regret, it wasn't dissatisfaction. It was more like standing in a beautiful room and realizing the door was open, but you didn't remember walking in. Sometimes Daisy would catch him staring out the window. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask gently. Rex would pause, then answer honestly, "Nothing important." And that was true, because whatever he was feeling didn't seem important enough to explain, but it was strong enough to stay. Rex had always believed in planning. If you mapped your life carefully enough, nothing could surprise you. He had planned his education, planned his career, planned his investments. Even his relationships had followed a quiet structure. Meet someone, build stability, move forward. Daisy fit perfectly into that design. She wanted the same things he did, a steady home, shared goals, a future that felt secure. They talked about children in abstract terms. "Maybe in a few years," Daisy would say. "Yeah," Rex replied. When things slowed down, they never talked about names, or schools, or what kind of parents they wanted to be. Just timelines, deadlines, checkpoints, and Rex never questioned it, because in his world a future that made sense was better than a future that felt uncertain. Even if part of him wondered what it meant to build something, without ever feeling lost inside it. The hospital that morning felt different from every other place Rex had ever walked into. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it reminded him of something he rarely allowed himself to consider. That life could interrupt him, no matter how well he planned, no matter how much control he believed he had. Sitting in the waiting area earlier, he had felt it, a subtle discomfort he couldn't explain. Not fear, just a quiet sense that something didn't belong in the neat structure of his life. As if the path he had been following so confidently had developed a small bend he hadn't noticed before. Rex told himself it was nothing. Just nerves, just fatigue, just another day. But deep down, he knew that feeling had a meaning. He just didn't know yet what it was trying to warn him about. Rex had always believed success would feel lighter, like reaching the top of a mountain and finally being able to breathe. But lately, it felt more like standing on solid ground and realizing how far he had drifted from anything familiar. He carried his achievements with him everywhere, in his conversations, in his decisions, even in his silence. And he did. That was the problem. There were no surprises left. No unknown paths, just a future that had already been mapped in perfect detail. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit alone in his living room with the city lights reflecting off the glass and wonder what it would feel like to want something he couldn't schedule, to care about something that didn't improve his life on paper. He never shared those thoughts, not with Daisy, not with anyone, because they didn't sound reasonable. They just sounded human. On paper, Rex Larson had already crossed the finish line. The career was secure. The relationship was stable. The future was neatly outlined. There was nothing missing that anyone could point to. And yet, standing in that hospital earlier, watching strangers live small, honest moments with the people they loved, Rex felt something shift inside him. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. He realized that for years he had been chasing a version of life that looked impressive from the outside, a version that earned respect, a version that made sense to everyone else. But not once had he stopped to ask himself a simple question: do I actually feel like I belong in the life I built? The thought lingered longer than he expected, and for the first time, Rex understood the quiet truth beneath all his achievements. He hadn't lost anything. He just hadn't found what he was really looking for yet. The waiting room was almost too quiet. Soft music floated through the air, the kind meant to relax people who didn't realize how tense they were. A few patients sat scattered across the chairs, each lost in their own thoughts, their own worries. Daisy flipped through a magazine beside Rex, occasionally pointing out wedding ideas she liked. Table settings, color palettes, small details that made the future feel real. Rex nodded when expected, smiled when appropriate, but his attention drifted. Not because of Daisy, not because of the hospital, just because something inside him felt slightly out of place, like a note in a song that didn't quite belong. He checked his phone again. No new messages. For once, there was nothing demanding his attention, and in that quiet moment, with nothing to distract him, Rex became aware of a strange feeling. Not fear. He just felt it, a voice calling a name. Daisy Walker. The voice was calm, professional, ordinary. And yet, the moment it reached him, Rex felt his chest tighten. He lifted his head slowly, not expecting anything more than another nurse or doctor moving through their routine, but as his eyes focused, his thoughts stopped. The woman standing near the doorway held a clipboard in one hand and waited patiently, scanning the room for the person she had called. She wore a white coat. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her posture was confident, steady, composed. Rex recognized her before his mind could argue, not because of how she looked now, but because of how she had once looked at him. The name surfaced quietly in his thoughts, like a memory that had never fully disappeared. His past didn't rush back all at once. It arrived gently, in fragments. A shared apartment, late nights talking about dreams, the way she used to laugh when he took life too seriously. Rex remained seated, staring. The world around him continued normally. But for him, everything had already shifted, because he knew, with sudden certainty, that the life he thought was behind him had just stepped back into the room. For a brief moment, Rex forgot how to stand. His body stayed in the chair, but his thoughts were already somewhere else, drifting through years he had carefully packed away and labeled as finished. Lori scanned the room again, her eyes moving past faces, past strangers, until they finally met his, and something changed. Not in the room, in her. Her expression froze for half a second. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, just long enough for Rex to see the truth beneath her calm. She hadn't expected this either. The world seemed to slow around them. The soft music faded into the background. The quiet conversations blurred into noise. Even Daisy's presence beside him felt distant. It was just the two of them now. Two people standing on opposite sides of a life they never closed properly. She straightened her posture, drew in a steady breath, and let professionalism settle over her face like a carefully worn mask. "Follow me, please," she said again, her voice smooth and controlled. Daisy stood up immediately, grateful for the attention. "Thank you," she said warmly. Rex didn't respond. He was still trying to understand how a past he had stopped thinking about had found him in the one place he never wanted to confront it. Rex stood up slowly, not because his legs were tired, but because his mind hadn't caught up with what was happening yet. Daisy stepped forward without hesitation, already following Lori toward the hallway. Rex stayed a half step behind, his eyes fixed on Lori's back as she walked. Her movements were steady, controlled. Nothing about her suggested shock or hesitation. And yet, Rex noticed the smallest detail. Her shoulders were tense. The hallway was narrow and quiet, the kind designed to keep people calm. White walls, soft footsteps, low voices. Daisy tried to fill the silence. "So, do you work here full-time?" she asked politely. "Yes," Lori replied. "I've been here for several years." Her tone was even, too even. Rex listened to their conversation without really hearing it. His thoughts drifted backward, not in clear memories, but in feelings. The way Lori used to speak his name, the way she would fall asleep during his late-night work calls, the way she once told him she felt like she was waiting for him to notice her. The hallway felt shorter than it should have been, not because of the distance, but because Rex knew something was ending, and something else, something unfinished, was beginning again. Inside the examination room, the door closed with a soft click. Daisy sat on the edge of the bed, relaxed, already comfortable in the space. She talked easily about wedding plans, about colors and locations, about how her sister wanted to help with decorations. Lori listened, nodding occasionally, typing notes into the system, asking routine questions in a calm, steady voice. Rex stood near the wall. He wasn't part of the conversation, not because he didn't care, but because every word felt distant, like it was coming from another room. He watched Lori's reflection in the glass cabinet. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, her face more serious, her movements precise and controlled, but her eyes still carried something unfinished, something that didn't belong in a professional setting. It was harmless, and yet it felt louder than anything Daisy had said. Lori pulled her hand back immediately. "I'll step out while you change," she said. Her voice shifted slightly at the end, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for Rex to feel it settle deep in his chest. The silence that followed was heavier than any conversation. Lori left the room without looking back. The door closed quietly behind her, and suddenly Rex felt exposed, as if the walls had moved closer. Daisy stood up and smiled at him. "I'll be right back," she said. "They're just taking some samples." Rex nodded. "Take your time," he replied. She kissed his cheek lightly and followed the nurse out. And just like that, he was alone. No meetings, no phone calls, no one asking him questions, only his thoughts. He sat down slowly, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Seeing Lori again hadn't brought anger. It hadn't even brought sadness. It brought confusion. He thought he had moved on, thought that chapter of his life had closed naturally, without damage. But sitting there now, in a quiet room that smelled faintly of disinfectant, Rex realized something uncomfortable. You don't truly move on from a person. You just learn how to live without asking what could have been. And for the first time in years, he found himself asking. Rex stepped out into the hallway while Daisy was with the nurse. The corridor was quieter now, with fewer people moving around. The soft sounds of footsteps and distant voices blended into a calm background that felt almost unreal. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely, trying to ground himself. That was when he noticed her. A little girl sat alone on a bench a few steps away, swinging her legs slowly. A small backpack rested beside her. She was holding a juice box, sipping from it thoughtfully while looking around. Then her eyes met his. She didn't look away. She studied him, not with fear, not with curiosity alone, with recognition. Rex felt a strange tension settle in his chest. He looked around, half expecting a parent to appear and call her back. No one did. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if comparing something in her mind, then spoke in a quiet, clear voice. "Why do you look like my daddy?" The question landed gently, but it felt like it shifted the air around him. Rex opened his mouth, then closed it again. No answer came, because nothing in his life had prepared him for a moment like this, and deep inside a thought surfaced that made his heart slow. That shouldn't be possible. Rex stood up slowly, not in panic, not in fear, just with the quiet instinct that something important was about to reveal itself. Before he could speak again, the girl hopped off the bench and ran toward a nearby office, her small footsteps echoing lightly against the floor. "Mom," she called cheerfully, "that man looks like me." The word hit him harder than the question. Mom. Rex followed her without thinking, his body moving ahead of his thoughts. Inside, Lori stood by a desk, reviewing something on her tablet. She looked up when she heard her daughter's voice, and then she saw him. For a brief moment, Lori didn't move. Her eyes shifted from the little girl to Rex, and stayed there. The calm expression she had maintained all morning disappeared. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the right word. Rex's heart beat slower than it should have, just heavy. He finally spoke, his voice low and careful. Lori didn't answer immediately, but in acceptance. "Yes," she said softly. The word carried no drama, no explanation, just truth. And in that single moment, the life Rex thought he understood shifted forever. Rex didn't sit down. He didn't speak again right away either. He just stood there, staring at the little girl who was now holding Lori's hand, completely unaware that her existence had just rearranged a man's entire life. 6 years. That number appeared in his mind without effort. 6 years of mornings he never witnessed. 6 years of small milestones he never celebrated. 6 years of a child growing into a person without ever knowing his name. His career suddenly felt distant. His achievements felt quiet. Lori watched him closely, waiting for a reaction, but there was no anger on his face, no accusations, just a calm, heavy understanding. "I didn't know," Rex said finally. Lori nodded once. "I know." The little girl looked between them, confused by the silence. Rex lowered himself slightly to her level and offered a small, gentle smile. "What's your name?" he asked. "Candace," she replied proudly. The sound of it settled into his chest in a way nothing else ever had. And in that quiet hospital hallway, with no audience and no announcements, Rex Larson understood something that changed the meaning of every success he had ever known. This was the first day of the life he never planned for, and the first day of the one that finally felt real. They didn't speak much before leaving the hospital, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything felt too heavy to rush. Lori suggested a small cafe 2 blocks away, quiet, neutral, a place where people talked softly and didn't ask questions. Rex agreed immediately. He didn't tell Daisy where he was going. He didn't check his phone. He didn't think about work. For the first time in years, nothing else felt more important than a conversation he had avoided his entire life. They sat across from each other by the window, 2 cups of coffee between them, no past, no future, just a truth that had waited 6 years to be spoken out loud. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The cafe was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of cups being placed on tables and low conversations that blurred into the background. Rex stared at his coffee, watching the surface settle. Lori sat with her hands folded loosely, her eyes fixed on a spot just past his shoulder. It felt strange to be this close again. Not awkward, just unfamiliar. "So," Rex finally said, his voice lower than usual, "how long were you going to keep this from me?" Lori didn't flinch. She exhaled slowly, then met his eyes. "I didn't plan to," she replied. "I just never knew when you'd actually listen." The words weren't sharp. They were honest, and somehow that made them heavier. Rex looked down again. "I would have wanted to know." Lori nodded gently. "I believe you." Then she added quietly, "I just didn't believe you would have stayed." Rex leaned back slightly, resting his hands around the warm cup. "I thought you disappeared because you stopped caring," he said. "You never answered my calls. You never explained." Lori's expression softened, but there was no apology in her eyes. "I left because I cared too much," she replied. Rex looked up. She continued, her voice calm, steady, but layered with something deeper. "You were always chasing the next thing, the next promotion, the next idea, the next version of yourself." She paused, "and I was always waiting for you to notice I was still standing beside you." Rex didn't interrupt. Lori stared into her cup for a moment before speaking again. "I didn't want to become another responsibility in your life, another thing you managed instead of felt." Rex swallowed. "I never meant to make you feel invisible." "I know," she said softly, "but you did anyway." The words weren't an accusation. They were simply a truth that had been waiting for a place to land. There was a pause between them that felt different from the others. Not uncomfortable, just careful. Rex finally asked the question he had been circling since the hallway. "When did you find out?" Lori didn't pretend to misunderstand. 2 weeks after I left," she said quietly. Rex's fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "You didn't think about telling me?" "I thought about it every day," she replied. "At first," he looked up at her, and then I realized you were finally getting everything you had worked for. Your company was growing. You were always traveling, always building." She met his eyes again. "I didn't want to be the reason you had to choose between the life you wanted and the life that was already growing inside me." Rex shook his head slowly. "You should have let me decide." Lori smiled faintly. "You had already decided. You just didn't know it yet." The words settled between them, not as blame, but as understanding. Because deep down, Rex knew she wasn't wrong. Rex stared at the surface of his coffee again, as if the answer might appear there. "She's 6, Lori said softly. "Her name is Candace." The name landed gently, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real. Rex repeated it under his breath. Candace. He had said her name only once before, in the hallway, without realizing how much it would stay with him. "She looks happy," he said quietly. Lori nodded. "She is. She's kind, curious. She asks a lot of questions." Rex let out a slow breath. "I missed everything." Lori didn't rush to comfort him. She simply said yes, not harshly, not gently, just honestly. Rex leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused. "I spent 6 years building a company," he said, "and I didn't even know I had a daughter learning how to tie her shoes." Lori watched him carefully. "She didn't miss your success," she said. "She missed a person she never knew existed." For the first time in his life, there was nothing he could calculate, no deal to fix, no plan to adjust. just time he would never get back. The cafe felt quieter than before, not because the noise had changed, but because Rex was no longer paying attention to anything outside their table. I always thought I was doing the right thing, he said slowly. Building something meaningful, creating a future. Lori listened without interrupting. He let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. But time doesn't wait for stability, does it? Lori shook her head gently. No, it just keeps moving. Rex looked at her. At what point did you stop expecting me to show up? Lori didn't answer immediately. After Candace learned to walk, she said, she kept falling, getting back up, laughing every time, and I realized she didn't need someone who might come someday. She needed someone who was already there. The words weren't cruel, they were practical, and that made them harder to hear. Rex nodded slowly. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what she had carried alone. They sat quietly for a while after that, not in tension, not in discomfort, just two people finally sharing the same truth. Rex watched people pass outside the cafe window, couples walking, parents holding small hands, ordinary lives unfolding without announcement. I don't know how to be a father, he said eventually. Lori didn't react with surprise. She smiled faintly. No one does at first. Rex looked back at her. I don't even know where to start. Lori considered him for a moment before answering. You start by being honest, she said, with yourself and with her. Rex nodded slowly. For the first time, he wasn't trying to prove anything. Not success, not strength, not control, just a willingness to show up, and that felt unfamiliar, but also necessary. Rex sat forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. There's something I don't understand, he said quietly. Why didn't you give me the chance to fail, or succeed? At least I would have known. I tried. Lori's gaze softened. Because I knew you, she replied, and I knew you would have tried to do everything at once. Be the perfect partner, the perfect father, the perfect founder. She paused. And you would have burned yourself out trying to hold all of it together. Rex frowned. You don't know that. Lori smiled gently. I lived with you for 3 years. I know exactly that. Not defensively. Honestly. I thought I was protecting myself, Lori continued. But I was also protecting Candace. From uncertainty. From waiting for someone who might always be half present. Rex looked down. So you made the choice for all of us? Yes, she said simply. And I've carried that weight every day since. The truth wasn't comfortable. But it was clean. No excuses, no justifications. Just two people finally admitting the cost of their decisions. They finished their coffee in silence, not because the conversation had ended, but because it had reached a place where words were no longer necessary. Outside, the city continued as usual. People rushed past the windows, unaware that inside a small cafe, two lives had quietly realigned. Rex stood first. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, and I don't expect anything to change overnight. He met her eyes. But I want to be part of her life, not as an idea, not as a promise, as a person. Lori studied him carefully, not as his past, not as someone she once loved, but as a man asking to enter a life that already existed without him. Finally, she said, then start by showing up, not with plans, not with money, just with time. Rex nodded. Just responsibility, the kind that doesn't ask whether you're ready, only whether you're willing. Rex didn't announce his arrival. He didn't bring gifts. He didn't make speeches. He simply showed up. The first time Lori allowed him to visit Candace properly, it was on a quiet Saturday afternoon. No special plans. No big expectations. Just a small apartment filled with soft light and the sound of a cartoon playing in the background. Candace sat on the floor, surrounded by coloring books and pencils, focused on staying inside the lines. Rex stood near the doorway, unsure where to place his hands. Hi, he said gently. Candace looked up. Her eyes widened slightly, then she smiled in a way that felt too open, too trusting. You're the man from the hospital, she said. Rex nodded. Yeah, that's me. She studied him for a second, then pointed at the empty space beside her. Do you know how to color? Rex hesitated. Then he sat down, and for the first time in his life, a meeting felt more important than anything he had ever scheduled. Rex realized very quickly that nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Not business school, not leadership seminars, not years of managing teams and projects. Candace handed him a blue pencil. This one is for the sky, she said seriously. Rex took it like it was something valuable. Got it, he replied. He tried to stay inside the lines the way she did, but his hand moved too fast, too careless. The blue crossed into the edges of the house she had drawn. Candace looked at it, then at him. That's okay, she said kindly. Houses don't mind. Rex smiled without thinking. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not forgiving a mistake, not making it smaller, just accepting it. They sat there for almost an hour, coloring in quiet focus. No pressure, no expectations, just shared space. Lori watched from the kitchen doorway, pretending to organize dishes she had already cleaned. Rex didn't notice her. For once, he wasn't trying to perform. He was just learning how to exist in a moment that didn't require anything from him, except attention. On his third visit, Candace asked him something he wasn't ready for. They were sitting at the small kitchen table, eating cereal that had gone slightly soggy from too much milk. "Why don't you live with us?" she asked suddenly. Rex froze. The question wasn't curious. It wasn't emotional, like asking why the sky was blue. Rex opened his mouth, then closed it again. He glanced at Lori, who was rinsing a cup at the sink. She didn't turn around. She let him answer. Candace thought about this for a moment. "So you didn't choose to leave?" "No," Rex said. "I just didn't know I was needed." She nodded, satisfied with that explanation, and went back to her cereal. Rex sat quietly, the weight of the conversation settling in his chest. That was the first time he understood something important. He couldn't rewrite the past, but every answer he gave from now on would shape the future. Rex stopped trying to impress. He stopped arriving with nervous energy, with prepared lines in his head, with the need to prove anything. Instead, he arrived early, sometimes too early. He would sit on the couch while Candace finished her homework, flipping through a book he didn't really read, just happy to be in the same room. He learned her routines, that she liked peanut butter on one side of the bread and jam on the other, that she hated socks with seams, that she always saved the red candies for last. None of it felt important, on paper, but it felt important to her, and that made it important to him. One evening, as he helped her practice spelling words, Candace looked up and said casually, "You're better at listening than most grown-ups." Rex paused, not because he disagreed, but because he had spent most of his life being praised for speaking, for leading, for deciding. And now, the thing that mattered most was simply being there when someone else was talking. One afternoon, Candace scraped her knee while running outside. No blood, no panic, just the kind of fall that feels bigger than it is. She ran inside with tears in her eyes, holding her leg, trying to stay brave. Lori was in the shower. Rex was the only one there. He froze for half a second. Then he knelt in front of her. "Can I see?" he asked gently. Candace nodded, still sniffing. He examined her knee, wiped the dirt away carefully with a damp cloth, then placed a small bandage over it. "There," he said. "All better." Candace stared at the bandage like it was something special. "Mom usually does that." Rex smiled softly. "I'm glad she taught me." Candace wrapped her arms around his neck without warning, just for a second, but it felt longer than any business deal he had ever closed, and in that moment, Rex realized something that surprised him. This was the first time anyone had ever needed him. For nothing he owned, Rex started canceling meetings, not all of them, just the ones that didn't feel urgent anymore. The first time he skipped a conference call to attend Candace's school presentation, his assistant sounded confused. "Are you sure?" she asked. "They've been waiting weeks for this slot." "I'm sure," he replied. The school gym was noisy and unorganized. Parents sat on folding chairs, holding phones and whispering to each other. Candace stood on the small stage, nervously shifting her weight. When her eyes found Rex in the crowd, her face lit up. She waved at him. Not dramatically, just enough to say, "You're here." Rex felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't record the moment. He didn't post about it. He just sat there, watching a child read her lines with shaky confidence. And for the first time, missing a meeting felt like a promotion. Rex used to measure his days by results. Now he measured them by moments. How long Candace spent explaining her drawings. How many questions she asked on the walk to school. How often she reached for his hand without thinking. He learned that children don't rush through conversations. They pause. They repeat themselves. They notice things adults overlook. One evening, Candace pointed at the sky and said, "The clouds look like they're resting." Rex looked up. They did. He couldn't remember the last time he had looked at the sky without checking his phone. "You think clouds get tired?" he asked. Candace nodded seriously. "Everything gets tired." Rex smiled. It was such a simple thought, and somehow it felt like advice he had needed for years. Rex stopped trying to be impressive. He cooked dinners that burned slightly at the edges. He mixed up laundry colors. He forgot to buy the right cereal more than once. Candace didn't care. She cared that he sat at the table with her, that he listened to her stories, that he laughed when she made up jokes that didn't quite make sense. One night, while they were washing dishes together, Candace said casually, "You don't have to know everything. You just have to stay." Rex paused, holding a wet plate in his hands. "Who told you that?" he asked. She shrugged. "I figured it out." Rex felt a quiet shift inside him. All his life he had believed value came from competence, from knowing, from being ahead, and here was a child teaching him that sometimes being present mattered more than being right. At first, Rex didn't even realize what he was doing. He simply stopped reaching for his phone as often. Meetings still happened. Emails still arrived. The world didn't collapse without his constant attention. But now, when Candace talked, his phone stayed face down on the table. When she showed him a drawing, he didn't glance at notifications halfway through. When she told him about her day, he didn't rush her to get to the point. One evening, his phone buzzed repeatedly during dinner. Candace looked at it, then at him. "Aren't you going to answer?" Rex smiled and pushed the phone slightly away. "It can wait." Candace nodded, satisfied. Later that night, Rex realized something that felt both simple and unsettling. For years, he had believed being available meant being reachable. But now, he understood the difference. Being reachable was for everyone else. Being available was for the person sitting right in front of you. Rex didn't make promises anymore. He didn't say, "I'll always be here." He didn't say, "I'll never leave." He just kept coming back. Every week, every weekend. Every small moment that didn't look important from the outside. Rainy days when Candace stayed home sick and he read the same story 3 times in a row. Busy mornings when he helped tie her shoes, even though he was running late. Evenings when they built puzzles that took hours and still missed pieces. Lori watched all of it quietly. She didn't comment. She didn't interfere. She simply noticed that Rex never disappeared. Not when things were easy. Not when they were boring. Not when nothing special was happening. One night, after Candace had gone to bed, Lori said softly, "You know she's starting to expect you." Rex nodded. "Good." Lori studied him for a moment. Not as his past, not as a possibility, but as a presence that had stopped being uncertain. And for the first time since the hospital, Rex understood what real commitment felt like. Not intensity, not emotion, just consistency. Daisy didn't hear the truth from Rex. She heard it while standing at the hospital's front desk, signing a form she barely glanced at. The nurse smiled politely as she handed the clipboard back. "You're very lucky," she said casually. "Your fiancée's daughter is adorable." The sentence landed softly. Too softly. Daisy looked up. "I'm sorry, what?" The nurse froze for half a second, confusion flickering across her face. "Oh, I thought you knew," she said quickly. "She was here earlier with her mother. Candace, right?" Daisy felt the room tilt, her fingers tighten around the clipboard, knuckles whitening. "My fiancé doesn't have a daughter," she said calmly. The nurse's smile faded. I'm so sorry. I must have misunderstood." But Daisy already knew, not the details, and it had arrived without asking permission. Daisy didn't cry in the hospital. She didn't raise her voice. She finished the paperwork, thanked the nurse, and walked outside into the cool air. She sat on a bench near the entrance, hands folded neatly in her lap, waiting, not because she didn't feel anything, not defensive, just somewhere else. "Hey," he said, "sorry I took so long." Daisy stood. "Do you have a child?" she asked quietly. Rex stopped walking. The city noise faded around them. He looked at her, and in that moment Daisy knew the answer before he spoke. They sat across from each other that night in the penthouse dining room, the same place where they had planned their future, the same table where he had asked her to marry him. Rex didn't try to soften it. He didn't rush. He told her everything. About Lori, about the hospital, about Candace. He spoke slowly, carefully, like a man who knew there was no version of this story that ended well. Daisy listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. "How long did you know?" "Only since today," Rex said. "I swear." She nodded, not relieved, just processing. "And you were going to tell me?" she asked. "Yes, when?" Rex didn't answer immediately, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. Daisy leaned back slightly, folding her arms. "So I'm not losing you to another woman," she said. Rex looked up, surprised. "No," she continued. "I'm losing you to a life you didn't know you abandoned." It was clear. "You didn't lie to hurt me," she said. "You lied because you didn't know how to exist in 2 truths at once." Rex swallowed. "That doesn't make it easier," she added. "But it makes it honest." She looked around the apartment, the furniture they chose together, the future they designed carefully. "You were ready for marriage," she said. "Just not for reality." Daisy reached for her hand. She twisted the ring once, then slid it off smoothly and placed it on the table between them. Rex stared at it. "You don't hate me?" he asked. "I wanted a partner," she continued, "not a man learning who he needs to become." Rex's voice cracked slightly. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know," Daisy said. "That's why this hurts anyway." Daisy picked up her coat. "I'll tell people it didn't work," she said. "They don't need details." She looked at him calmly. "Fair doesn't matter right now," she said. "Peace does." She paused at the door. "Go be the man your child already believes you are." The words stayed behind after she left. They filled the apartment more completely than any argument ever could. Not emptier, just quieter. Rex sat alone on the couch that night, the ring still resting on the table. No anger, no relief, just the weight of a choice he hadn't actively made, but fully accepted. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man losing something. He felt like a man stepping away from a version of himself that no longer fit. Rex didn't celebrate. He didn't collapse. He simply understood that some chapters don't end because of failure. They end because growth demands space. And as he turned off the lights and prepared for a future that looked nothing like the one he planned, Rex realized something quietly profound. This wasn't the moment his life fell apart. This was the moment it finally became honest. Rex didn't tell Lori immediately, not because he hesitated, but because he wanted to be certain his decision wasn't driven by guilt or pressure. When he finally did tell her, they were sitting on opposite ends of the couch in Lori's apartment, Candace asleep in her room, the TV muted. "I ended it," Rex said quietly. Lori didn't react the way he expected. She didn't smile, she didn't soften, she didn't move closer. She simply nodded once. "Okay," she said. Rex waited for more. Nothing came. Rex shifted slightly. "That's it?" Lori looked at him. "What were you expecting?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Something—" Lori stood up and walked to the window. "You didn't end your engagement for me," she said calmly. "You ended it because your life changed." Rex nodded. "Yes, but I wanted you to know." "I do know," Lori replied. "And I'm not surprised." She turned back to him. "But don't confuse information with intention." The words were gentle, but firm. Rex took a breath. "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just wanted to be honest." Lori studied him. Then she said the one sentence he hadn't prepared for. "I don't want a relationship right now." Rex froze, not because he felt rejected, but because he realized how much he had assumed. "You don't?" he asked quietly. "No," Lori replied. "I want stability, for Candace, and for myself." She sat down again, facing him directly. "I spent 6 years building a life without you," she said. "I'm not ready to let you back in as anything more than her father." Rex nodded slowly. "So what does that mean?" "It means 6 months. 6 months of what?" "Of nothing romantic," she said. "No expectations, no emotional shortcuts, just you showing up for her." Rex considered this. "And after 6 months? Then we'll see," Lori replied. Not hopefully, not pessimistically. Rex leaned back. "You don't trust me." Lori smiled faintly. "I trust your intentions. I don't trust the timing." She met his eyes. "You just walked away from one life. You're excited, emotional, motivated." She paused. "That's not the same as being steady." Rex nodded. "I don't want to fall into something again," she continued. "I want to see who you are when nothing is new anymore." The words weren't cold. They were protective. Old Rex would have argued, would have tried to negotiate, would have tried to prove something. This Rex didn't. "You're not going to push?" "No," Rex replied. "Because this isn't about what I want. It's about what she needs." They stood up together, just aligned, and whatever happens later, happens later. "Yes," she replied. They didn't hug. They didn't touch. They didn't speak again. Not disappointed, but peace in the fact that he didn't argue. This wasn't a romantic chapter. It wasn't dramatic. It was something deeper. Two adults choosing patience over comfort, responsibility over emotion, presence over desire. Rex didn't gain a partner that night. He gained a role. And Lori didn't regain a lover. She gained trust in a man who finally understood that real connection isn't built through words. It's built through time. And for the first time, both of them were willing to wait. The first month felt unfamiliar. Rex still woke up early, still worked hard, still carried responsibility. But something had shifted. His calendar wasn't empty. It was intentional. He blocked off school mornings, afternoons for pickups, evenings for dinner and homework. Meetings were moved. Some were canceled entirely. Not because he had to, because he chose to. And for the first time, his success didn't feel like something that competed with his life. It served it. The first major test came sooner than expected. An international conference, key investors, a speech he had been preparing for months. It fell on the same day as Candace's school performance. Old Rex wouldn't have hesitated. This time, he didn't even argue with himself. He emailed his assistant a single sentence. "I won't be attending." That afternoon, he sat in a crowded school auditorium, knees pressed against the back of a folding chair, watching Candace fidget nervously on stage. When she spotted him, her shoulders relaxed. That was enough. Children notice patterns. Candace noticed that Rex arrived when he said he would, and Rex always answered the same way. Not with excitement, with certainty. Most days weren't special. Homework, dishes, laundry, quiet evenings. Rex learned that growth doesn't announce itself. It happens while tying shoelaces, while checking spelling words, while listening to stories that don't have endings yet. One night, Candace fell asleep halfway through a movie. her head resting against his arm. He sat there until the credits ended, not because he was afraid to wake her, but because he finally understood the value of staying still. Lori said very little during those months. She observed. She noticed that Rex didn't ask for praise, didn't ask for reassurance, didn't ask where this was leading. He didn't flirt, didn't push, didn't test boundaries. He showed up, consistently. That mattered more than any promise. Rex stopped carrying his phone from room to room. It stayed on counters, on shelves, in drawers. Candace noticed. "You don't look at it much anymore," she said one evening. Rex smiled. "I look at you." She nodded, satisfied with that answer. The world didn't fall apart. His company didn't collapse. What changed was his attention. And attention, he learned, was the rarest form of care. Rex made mistakes. He forgot Spirit Day. Burned dinner more than once. Misjudged bedtime routines. Candace corrected impatiently. "That's not how Mom does it." Rex listened. He adjusted. He didn't get defensive. For the first time in his life, learning wasn't about mastery. It was about humility. Near the end of the 6 months, Candace said something casually while brushing her teeth. "You know," she said, foam still at the corner of her mouth, "you don't feel new anymore." Rex paused. "Is that bad?" She shook her head. "No, it means you're real." The words stayed with him long after she went to bed, because that was the goal. Just permanence. 6 months passed without ceremony, no countdown, no conversation marking the day, just a quiet understanding that something had held. Rex wasn't perfect. He was present, and that was the difference. On the final evening of the 6 months, Rex sat at the kitchen table helping Candace with a science project. Paint covered his hands, his tie was loosened. His phone sat forgotten in the other room. Lori watched from the doorway, not evaluating, not guarding, just seeing. "You're different," she said quietly. She nodded. "You stayed," and for the first time Rex understood what growth really looked like. Not success, not change, but commitment that didn't need to be announced. 6 months later, nothing felt special, and that was the point. The apartment smelled faintly of glue and paint. Papers were spread across the table, covered in half-finished diagrams and crooked labels. Rex leaned beside her, holding a small brush with more concentration than he ever held during board meetings. "Don't make the lava too neat," Candace said seriously. "It's supposed to look messy." Rex smiled. "I've always been bad at messy." She looked at his hands. "Not today." Paint had reached his sleeves. His tie was already on the counter. His phone hadn't moved in hours. Nothing about the scene looked impressive, but everything about it felt real. Lori stood in the kitchen doorway. She wasn't supervising. She wasn't waiting for anything. She was just observing. The way Rex listened when Candace explained things. The way he asked questions instead of correcting her. The way he stayed seated even when nothing exciting was happening. This wasn't the man she loved years ago. That man chased progress. This one stayed present. "You're not the man I loved before," Lori said quietly. Rex looked up, unsure how to respond. "I know," he said after a moment. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no sadness, just acceptance. Lori stepped closer. "You're better," she added. Not because he had changed careers, not because he gave up ambition, not because he said the right things, but because he stayed when there was nothing to gain. There was no dramatic confession, no emotional speech, no music playing in the background, just 3 people standing in a small kitchen surrounded by glue, paper, and quiet. Candace looked up from her project. "Are we still having pizza after this?" she asked. Rex smiled. Always. That was the answer that mattered. Later that night, after Candace fell asleep on the couch with her project still unfinished, Rex turned off the lights and carried her gently to her bed. Lori watched from the hallway, not as someone waiting for a future, but as someone witnessing a present that finally felt stable. Rex stood in the doorway for a moment, making sure Candace was comfortable. Then he whispered, without thinking, "I'm here." He didn't say it for anyone else. He said it because it was true. There was no final kiss, no declaration, no promise about forever. Just 2 adults who finally grew into the people they were supposed to become. But by choosing presence, not by rewriting the past, but by showing up for what still existed. Rex didn't lose the life he built. He finally found the one he had been missing, and this time, he wasn't running toward anything. He was staying.